think there's a lot of upside to AI, obviously. So it's kind of like the internet moment, right? Again, I would say a lot of people think it's the iPhone moment. I think it's the internet moment. It's like a lot more, it's larger than just another medium coming out. It feels like there's ways to do things that weren't possible 5 years ago. I mean, even 24 months ago, 12 months ago. Some things seem like they were impossible 3 months ago and are possible today. So it's extremely moving really quickly. And I think there's tons of new types of tasks that are going to be available, tons of new types of jobs that are going to be created. And I think we're just scratching the surface on what's possible right now. So it'll take a little bit of time to settle. But I think it's kind of like the best time to be building something right now. There's tons of opportunities. There's tons of uncertainty, but the uncertainty creates those opportunities. So there's like gems that are hidden, and if you scratch enough, you'll find them. Yeah, so I think the way that we look at AI is how usable is it? Multimodal experiences are extremely interesting right now when you combine some of these modalities together. I think if I were to ask the audience, when was the last time this is at least in our domain, when was the last time you saw a movie that looked absolutely gorgeous? You could probably think of a few, right? Transformers, Mad Max, etc. Well, if I asked you when was the last time you saw a movie that you thought had brilliant dialogue, it's kind of hard to think of one. People who listen to audiobooks here, when was the last time you bought an audiobook? You made the purchase, you're like, this audiobook, that's amazing reviews. And you started it within the first 5 minutes, you're like, I can't do it. I can't listen to this individual talk for the next 8 hours, right? And one of the things that we were really excited about when we started 4 years ago was making audio malleable. Having this ability to kind of open a tool and kind of change audio that's been recorded already. And that's where we see a lot of use cases for us come in, where audio editing becomes so much simpler, audio creation becomes so much simpler. And I think a big area of focus now for us, and with a lot of other tools that exist out there, GPT-4, Stable Diffusion, DALL-E, I'm sure everyone in the room has tried to use DALL-E or Stable Diffusion. Every time I try using it, I get stick figures. And I don't know what commas to add and where to put the 4K exactly, how many, or maybe it's 8K, etc. But I think one thing that we really need to work on now is kind of fine-tuning these models, getting to behave in a controlled manner. Artists typically care about every single pixel of what you're looking at, right? So that matters. It matters how the blade of grass looks, and if it looks 90% real or right, that's probably not good enough. So that's where we're trying to head towards in terms of product. And I think a lot of the folks, my colleagues that are working in the generative AI space, apart from voice and image and text, etc., it's kind of the last 10% that makes it unusable right now for a lot of users. It's really good for a great demo, and it's really good for a presentation, but it's that last 10% that kind of makes it impossible to sell or makes it impossible to kind of use like you use Photoshop today. And I think that's where we're really trying to bridge the gap. If anyone has GPUs, I'll buy them off of you after this talk. I think one of the issues that I see at least is there's tons of academic work that's published. One of the reasons that OpenAI has been so good is that they've actually been able to productize something, and they've made it really easy for people to use, right? I remember when Bing first announced that they integrated ChatGPT or some sort of GPT into their search engine, it was still very hard. Actually, if you go to Bing.com today, there's on the top right, there's some rewards that for some reason they're still trying to sell to you. There's tons of other stuff that's happening, right? And one of the things that needs to happen now, which I think is really critical, is unlearning. So I had the unfortunate time of working at a company called Research in Motion, which eventually turned to BlackBerry. That's one of the things that didn't do really well is unlearn, right? So when things shifted, they got stuck in this area. And I think right now we're in an era that everything could be unlearned and then kind of recreated better than it was before. So a really quick example of this is if you think about UX and UI, you interact with a web page, but that has certain limitations. My friend here probably talk a lot more than I can about e-commerce websites and the hundreds of layers and the complicated site maps that exist. But if you were to dig into one of those site maps, there's hidden pages that are dozens of layers, levels below, right? And that information doesn't get surfaced that well. So things like that can be reimagined when you add natural language into the mix of things, right? So in 2014, 2015, you had like Alexa and Google Assistant, Facebook M, RIP, that attempted to kind of surface that information in interesting ways. And I think like unlearning is one of the things that we have to do really well right now. The thing that excites me the most in the future is kind of the unknown. So I think one example that I really look at, and one of our investors really early on told us about this, is he looked at me and said, "You don't know what you're building." And that was like probably the best advice I got. And the reason for that is because if you look at something called YouTube, right? YouTube probably wasn't. I'm sure the founders of YouTube did not think YouTube is what it is today when they started. Actually, it was pretty far off. But through the iPhone, the ability for every smartphone to have cameras, democratizing video building and filmmaking, et cetera. There's folks like Mr. Beast who are producing content that is, surpasses what shows on Netflix get in terms of traction. I think one of the things that are really interesting with generative AI is that democratization of these tools it's becoming more accessible now. So we work with like large game studios and we work with small game studios. We work with like small production houses, and some of the most interesting things are they're actually able to use voice, whereas in the past it was restricted for them. We do a lot of language dubbing, so taking like a cast of 5 people and transforming them into 52 locales and languages. And to your point earlier, Jedan, that just opens up this huge opportunity to make content accessible to different demographics. We work with folks in like Iran, for example, who are building Persian shows, and they're transforming this content into English or Italian, etc. In some cases, we've seen some even work that's done in the middle. So we have like folks that have like the producer or director is sitting in one area. They do all the script writing in their native language, but then it goes to animation. The animation folks are sitting in Italy. They don't understand a single word of Farsi. And they're trying to animate this thing that they don't understand what's going on, right? So they could use text translation, but one of the things that's really helpful is we can automatically dub all of that content from one language to another. Now they're able to get that kind of feeling of that character. Language models have gotten so much better that you're actually able to translate, not literally, but kind of have a informal translation of what's going on. So you have this like nice little workflow that's built out really well where folks are able to do things that were kind of impossible maybe a year from today, which is like editing content and adding voiceovers, adding like visual effects that were extremely difficult to do prior to all of this generative AI stuff.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. This has been really informative. I have a question on the provenance side, or rather being able to trace it back to AI. What are your thoughts on what that might look like to make it easier for a consumer to be able to trace that the output was derived from AI?
Yeah, so the way I think about this is document e-signatures. So you have like these e-signatures that have existed that could be traced back to its original source. You signed on this day using Adobe Reader, Acrobat, etc. I think images, cameras have something very similar. You take a picture, there's metadata in that picture that'll tell you what day it was taken, what camera, etc. I think this will become the norm. It'll be kind of like everything will be signed, right? Just like today, you visit a website, you have that little padlock on the browser, and if that padlock doesn't exist, if the website isn't behind SSL, then the browser basically tells you you should proceed with caution, right? Some browsers basically say don't proceed at all, right? And I think that'll become the norm. I think like that migration took a little while to happen, and I think once it's happened a couple of times, and every time that it happens now, it gets quicker and quicker for us to adapt. So I think I think a lot of the content that will be AI generated will have some sort of regulation saying that it is AI generated, and then I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not surprised at all if you try to upload a clip from the NFL to YouTube today. It actually stops you before you get there. Try to upload a song, it'll stop you before you get there. Right? So that content doesn't even get uploaded. It stops you like in between that upload. I think that'll be very common as well. It'll, this AI generated content will have filters that'll determine like, oh, this is AI generated, this isn't, etc. And it'll basically prevent that content from being uploaded in the first place.